Hi, I'm Adam Shepherd.
And I'm Jane McCallion.
Welcome to the ITPro Podcast, your weekly guide to the most important topics in the IT industry.
So, Adam, I am sure that many of our listeners will be glad to hear that this week's podcast is a politics-free zone. No election chat, no Boris, no Jeremy, no nobody.
No. So, as we record this, it is polling day. By the time it goes out, the polls will have closed, been counted, and we will have a new government.
Yeah, but currently that's all a bit up in the air. But, I mean, obviously it has implications for the tech industry. Our colleague Kumar's Afifi Sabat wrote a roundup of the most important kind of tech bits from all the manifestos. So irrespective of who wins, it's definitely worth going and having a look at that. But yes, apart from this quick notice here, we are election-free, politics-free.
Yes, later on in the show, we'll be talking about the role that email can play in collaboration strategies and whether it can coexist with collaboration software, where we'll be talking to Chris Mills from Slack. But first, let's talk about this week's top news stories.
Okay, so our first story is that the Department for Transport is looking for a tech partner to help it develop a transport data mapping tool. So quite a nice lead on from last week's podcast, 'cause it's all about big data and data analysis, really.
Yes, it's an interesting story, this one. TfL has been doing some interesting things with data, and this is kind of an opportunity to extend that outside London in general.
Yeah, so apparently the goal is to create a tool that presents the data, so everything from buses to trains to everything, in the form of an interactive map. Apparently that will help develop transportation strategies more effectively and make decisions around investment. So it's an internal tool rather than anything that we're going to get hold of, which is perhaps for the best, because I'm sure that we all have our own little apps that do that. I'm not really sure that I need to know the status of rail traffic in Coventry, to be fair, unless I'm going to Coventry, but in general.
Well, you say that, but one of the most useful implementations of open data and data science for me has been TfL's open database, which it's kind of made accessible to third parties via API, which have allowed companies like Citymapper and Google Maps and other kind of transport mapping, journey planning services to essentially piggyback off TfL's live data to provide real-time updates on things like, train congestion, route planning, that kind of thing, which have been actually really, really quite transformative, certainly for my commuting.
Sure, but that's filtered, like you say, through an API. You don't personally have access to all the data yourself. And, I use similar things when I'm, basically anywhere there's an app that I use that is really good for buses, because I am a bus lover, coaches, and apps for undergrounds and metros, that kind of thing. But, I'm not delving into the database of the Oxford Bus Company and Stagecoach, for example, relying on the third-party service, and that's what you're talking about would be. But the DFT has said that it's for internal users and for the future development of an internal civil service only mapping tool. So this is very much for internal use.
For now, yeah, but I'm personally holding out hope that at some point it will be opened up to the likes of Citymapper and other companies of its ilk so that they can kind of expand that kind of service throughout other parts of the UK. So our next story is the news that Apple's long-awaited Mac Pro is finally available for pre-order. This is Apple's big professional-grade desktop workstation. Essentially, it's a competitor to the big, meaty rendering engines that you see produced by the likes of Dell or HPE that are for crunching through serious video tasks or for scientific modelling, that kind of thing.
So the entry model is a little under £6,000, and you can tool it up to the extent that it will cost you just under 50 grand. So yeah, I mean that 50 grand figure has hit the headlines, but it doesn't have to be that crazy. So what will you get if you have £50,000 to splash?
So if you go for the full whack, then you get a monster 28-core Intel Xeon W processor, which is one of Intel's professional-grade processors, and costs about 6.3 grand or thereabouts. You will also get 1.5 terabytes of DDR4 memory. You will get 2 Radeon Pro Vega 2 Duo cards with a grand total of 128 gigabytes of graphics memory, I believe. You will also get 4 terabytes of SSD storage and an Apple Afterburner card, which is for rendering ProRes files in applications like Final Cut Pro.
And also some wheels for your steel frame, and Magic Mouse 2 and a Magic Trackpad 2, so that you have both of those things.
Of course, can't forget the Magic Trackpad.
Well, yes, and indeed the wheels. It's not your everyday kind of desktop computer. It's not your everyday piece of tech, this. And, I, despite being an Apple devotee, will not be investing in this. Not least because I don't have sort of £5,500 to spend on a computer, nor the will to do so. But it was pointed out to me last night, when it comes to the £48,000 figure, I was kind of laughing and joking a bit about it. But the person I was speaking to, who is an IT professional, pointed out to me that with specs like this, actually, you shouldn't be comparing it to a computer, a normal desktop. Really, you should be looking at how much it would cost you to get a server with similar specifications, because you see this kind of thing more in your data center than you do on your desktop.
Yeah, and it's worth noting as well that, as with all Apple hardware, if you just go down the configurator and max it out, you will get stung in a couple of places on cost. The 4 terabyte SSD, for example, is over £1,200. Now, 4 terabyte SSDs do not cost that much. You can get them for around half the price, proper enterprise grade, NVMe, high-end drives for around half that in that capacity. If you max out everything, you will be paying more for components that you do not really need. The Apple Afterburner card as well is £1,800, and unless you're working with ProRes files extensively in applications like Final Cut Pro, and there's only a handful of applications that are supported by the Afterburner card as well. If you don't need that, then don't get it.
I mean, nobody, it is unlikely that anyone will need the absolute maximum specifications. So even say you want 4 terabyte SSD, maybe you just want the 2 Radeon Pro Vega 2 graphics cards rather than the 2 Radeon Pro Vega 2 Duo ones. You don't, it's unlikely that everybody is going to need everything. Lending some credence to my server example, though, Apple is producing a rack version of this.
Yes, they are. And it's interesting because, to the best of my knowledge, this is the first rack-mounted equipment that Apple has ever made.
Yes, same. I don't know of any other rack-mounted equipment that Apple has made, although our listeners are free to write in and inform us if we are wrong, of course.
What is notable, however, is that professional workstations like this are commonly produced in rack-mounted form factors by the likes of Dell and HPE. So the idea is that you would get a rack mount version of this workstation, install it in your data center, and then essentially any one of your design team or your video team or whatever can simply dial into it, like a VPN, and use the graphics horsepower as and when for kind of big scale rendering jobs, rather than having to drop 20-30 grand on every person who might need to use one.
Indeed. So this is available to pre-order now, and it's been very much positioned as an enterprise thing, and it actually starts shipping in February. And finally, Google has put out its annual report, its year-end search, showing what people have been searching for via Google search the most this year. In the UK, we have been interested in the Rugby World Cup, the Champions League final, Avengers Endgame, and various other things.
Sport was a big theme, as well as the Rugby World Cup and the Champions League. The Cricket World Cup was high up on the list. Notably absent any kind of political search terms.
HBO and its series have done really very well. Game of Thrones and Chernobyl right up there, which I must say was one of my favourite series of the year. Chernobyl, that is, rather than Game of Thrones. Sorry, Game of Thrones. You say that there's not really any politics. However, in the how-to category, we do have at number 6, how to vote in the European elections, and at number 8, how to register to vote, which, those two go nicely hand in hand, but it's sandwiched in between them is how to eat a pineapple. So I don't know whether that means that most people are registered to vote, or people are just generally more interested in knowing how to eat a pineapple.
For me, pineapples aside, this calls to mind one of the most bitterly amusing pieces of search trivia from the 2016 referendum, which was the huge spike in searches for terms like "what is the EU" after the vote had closed. And yeah, the comparative absence of searches for kind of major news and politics issues, particularly in the run-up to the general election and the looming spectre of Brexit, it indicates to me that we still aren't engaging with these issues on a kind of widespread basis.
Well, it's either that or we're just not going to Google for it, or we're more politically clued up. But I think a lot of people find their political information on, say, Twitter and Facebook.
Oh, that's a horrifying thought.
Indeed, or via news feeds and stuff. So for me, it makes more sense for people to be asking, what is Area 51 than, what is Article 50? You would hope that people know what Article 50 is by now. Area 51 is by the way, if anyone's wondering what the reference for that is from the Storm Area 51 event that happened a couple of months ago, which was the best example of a joke getting out of hand because of the internet that I've ever seen.
Okay, we're going to be taking a short break now, but when we come back, we will be talking to Chris Mills, Head of Customer Success for Europe, Middle East and Africa at Slack, about how companies can work email into their collaboration dreams.
See you after the break.
Hello, I'm Ollie Mann, and every Friday on The Week Unwrapped, we cover the stories you might have missed with journalists from theweek.co.uk. It's all the big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. That's The Week Unwrapped with me, Ollie Mann, available now for free from all good podcast apps.
And welcome back. And we are now joined by Chris Mills, Head of Customer Success at Slack for EMEA. Chris, thank you for joining us.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
It's an absolute pleasure to have you on, Chris. So, collaboration is, in many ways, the cornerstone of digital transformation. It's something that a lot of companies have grappled with. Companies have often had a lot of trouble with collaboration and with getting proper collaboration to work effectively. One of the complaints that we hear the most often is that whenever organizations try to roll out collaboration platforms, they often find employees going back to email almost as a force of habit. What I would like to know is, what role do you think email has to play in collaboration as a kind of core tenet of digital transformation?
If you think about collaboration tools, to your point, collaboration tools have been around for 40 years. Email, is 40 years old, yet that technology and that collaboration tool set hasn't changed in that period, and you think of the evolution that we've had in the digital workplace in that same time, or even over the last 12 years, is phenomenal, yet we're still using tools which are 40 years old. So Slack is really there to help kind of take a lot of what we use in our consumer environment. So if you think of, the tools like WhatsApp, text, Instagram, etc., and bring that into the workplace so that people are collaborating at work in the same way and using familiar tools that they use in their consumer environment.
I understand that completely, and we've said before we use Slack as well at Dennis, and as that kind of quick relay, as a chat application effectively, and for if somebody's working remotely, for example, it works really well. But surely there is still a role for email. I've heard before about platforms such as Slack, killing email, but we still need to converse with people outside. People still use email, and we still don't use all the same collaboration platforms. There's not necessarily the interoperability between different platforms. So is email ever really going to go away, or has the idea of it being killed perhaps been a little bit overhyped?
So I think there are a couple of things. One is it's very much of a push economy. So whoever sends you that email, it's their decision to determine whether that information you're going to receive is important to you or not. Or equally, it's their decision to decide whether that information isn't important to you. And with Slack, it's more of a pull economy. So you can subscribe to channels, which are essentially threads of common topics, be it projects, be it departments, office locations. And you can subscribe to that information and you can choose what's relevant to you, whereas email is very much of a push. The other part to note within email is you only ever see that 1% or 2% of your corporate knowledge that's your inbox. What you don't have visibility into is somebody else's inbox and what information's there. So there's a whole wealth of corporate information that you're unable to share across the organization and make better use of it as well. So certainly within an organization, a tool like Slack is much better at collaboration and sharing information. Now, we certainly recognize there are, external emails, and we fully expect customers to use external emails. But we've also released a new feature, which is called Share Channels, which allows organizations to be able to connect their Slack instance to another company's instance. So we still see customers using email, but we're also seeing those shared channels really go fast. And in fact, actually, we have 26,000 customers who have opened up over 70,000 shared channels since we launched the feature latter part of this year. We really are seeing customers start to kind of bridge that gap between their Slack instance and their customers or their partners' Slack instance as well.
So that works if both you and your partner have Slack instances, but is your goal to fully replace email? Is your goal in an ideal world for every company in the world to be using Slack and only Slack, and for email to effectively disappear and be abandoned as a communication channel?
I think our customers will decide whether that Slack to Slack instance and whether there are sufficient customers within your network that are using, or partners that are using Slack, that you want to connect through your Slack through shared channels to make it easier to collaborate. But there still will be instances, I'm sure, where some of our customers will be sending external emails to third parties who are not on Slack. We also have instances, of course, where customers have users that have not yet migrated onto Slack, and we're making that kind of bridge between email and Slack much easier with a feature we call Email Bridge, which allows you to send and receive Slack messages from within your email client, and you can respond to them and they get posted into Slack. And then when you move into Slack and start to use Slack, you have that whole history in there as well.
So, as a company and a team that has been using Slack for many, many years now, we have taken to Slack quite quickly and I think quite effectively, but there's a number of CIOs that I know have struggled with adoption, and for all emails quirks, shall we say, it does seem to be the preferred fallback for most users, and I've heard a number of CIOs complaining that collaboration software in general, not just Slack, but other kind of platforms, be it Skype for Business or Microsoft Teams or some of Citrix's solutions, those kind of things, they've tried to roll them out across the business, and users they've used it a little bit. They've used it kind of as much as they were kind of forced to effectively by management, but slowly they all migrated back to email, just as a kind of comfort zone type thing. How would you suggest getting a Slack deployment, or let's say the deployment of any collaboration software, to stick with users?
Yeah, and I'm not sure that's specific. That challenge the challenge you just described is specific to collaboration software. It's actually a challenge that any enterprise software deployment is going to face. And actually, if you think back to email, I'm old enough to remember email first coming into the workplace. I still remember people would receive emails and they would print them off. And they would even, dictate to their secretary or PA a response to that email. So I think that change curve is always going to exist with any technology. And again, a lot of the good things that you see in, if you've deployed any enterprise technology, be it collaboration, be it CRM, or be it, an ERP tool, is really kind of focusing on the behavioral change of people. Finding that what's in it for me for both individuals but also executives is a really important part of that change behavior. So, for example, I use tools like Workday and Concur that integrate directly with Slack. I'm able to receive approval requests for expense reports from Concur directly into my Slack channel. So I don't need to, so for me, from a productivity standpoint, I don't need to come out of Slack. I don't need to fire up a browser. I don't need to log into Concur. I don't need to search for the expense report and then approve it. I can do all of that from within Slack. So for me, that's a huge productivity saving. So that's what's in it for me as an individual. And then from an executive, it's being able to have visibility into the right channels and that visibility into the right information.
Well, unfortunately, that's all we have time for this week. I'd like to thank Chris Mills, Head of Customer Success at Slack again. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
You can find links to all the topics we've spoken about today in the show notes and even more on our website at itpro.co.uk.
You can also follow us on Twitter, where we are at ITPro, as well as Facebook and LinkedIn.
Don't forget to subscribe to the ITPro Podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever else you find podcasts to never miss an episode.
And we'll be back next week with more news and analysis from the world of IT. Until then, goodbye.
Goodbye.